The first time I saw the trail, I almost convinced myself it had always been there. That was the dangerous thing about the forest in winter. It never lied outright. It only rearranged your confidence, one quiet detail at a time, until you could no longer remember what certainty felt like. If you've spent enough time in remote wilderness, you learn to trust patterns more than instincts. Snow preserves stories. Animal tracks tell you what passed during the night. Broken branches reveal the direction of movement. Wind leaves signatures across frozen lakes. Every mark has a reason. But there was one morning when I found a trail pressed clean through untouched snow, stretching between two old hemlocks that hadn't stood more than 6 feet apart the evening before. No footprints led into it. No footprints came out. Just a narrow path where the snow had vanished, as if winter itself had stepped aside to let someone pass. The oldest ranger at our station looked at it for less than 5 seconds before turning away. "We don't patrol that one." He said it so calmly that I laughed. He didn't. By the end of that winter, 3 people would disappear without leaving a single track. One of them would be me. Not my body. Just the version of me that entered those woods believing every mystery could be explained. Even now, years later, I don't know whether what happened beyond that trail belonged to the forest, or whether the forest simply showed me something that had always been waiting inside my own mind. I wish I had never found out. My name is Daniel Mercer. At least, that's the name I've continued using. Sometimes I still hesitate before saying it aloud. I spent nearly 14 years working as a seasonal park ranger in a fictional national wilderness preserve tucked deep within the northern mountains of the United States. It wasn't one of the famous parks tourists packed into every summer. Most people had never heard of it, and those who did usually confused it with another forest 100 miles away. I liked it that way. Solitude had always made more sense to me than cities. When I was 10, my father disappeared during a solo winter hike in the Cascades. Search teams spent 11 days combing ravines, frozen rivers, abandoned logging roads, and avalanche fields. They found his backpack wedged beneath a fallen spruce. His compass was inside. His map was inside. Even his emergency radio was untouched. There were tracks leading away from the campsite. Then nothing. The official report blamed severe weather. My mother accepted that explanation because she had to. I never did. Not because I believed in monsters or conspiracies. Because wilderness doesn't erase evidence. Even storms leave evidence of what they erase. Something about his disappearance had never fit. That question followed me into adulthood. Maybe that's why I chose this work. People imagine park rangers spend most of their days rescuing hikers or telling tourists not to feed bears. Sometimes. Mostly we observed. We measured snowfall, monitored wildlife populations, repaired trails, documented erosion, checked weather stations, cleared fallen trees, and searched for people who underestimated nature. The job rewarded patience. Nature always revealed itself eventually. Or so I believed. The preserve covered nearly 500,000 acres of mountains, frozen marshland, glacial valleys, and forests so old that some trees had begun growing centuries before the first European settlers reached the region. Certain sections hadn't been visited in years. Not because they were forbidden. Simply because there was no reason to go. During summer, those forgotten valleys became oceans of green. During winter, they became another planet. Snow absorbed sound until your own heartbeat seemed loud enough to echo through the trees. Entire rivers disappeared beneath white crusts. Mist hovered between trunks long after sunrise. Distances became impossible to judge. I've watched experienced hikers mistake a ridge 2 miles away for one only a few hundred yards distant. Winter compresses the world while making it infinitely larger. That December arrived colder than any season I'd experienced. By early January, snowfall had buried trail markers nearly shoulder high. Most visitor areas closed. Only our small winter crew remained. There were 7 of us stationed at Iron Hollow Ranger Outpost. Chief Ranger Walter Harlan had worked there for 36 winters. He moved slowly but noticed everything. Grace Kim managed wildlife monitoring and knew every wolf pack within 50 miles. Luis Ortega maintained communications and weather systems. Brothers Evan and Cole Whitaker handled trail maintenance. Nora Ellis coordinated search and rescue logistics. Then there was me, the youngest permanent winter ranger. Walter welcomed me with the same sentence he'd apparently told every newcomer for decades. "The forest doesn't hate you." He paused. "It just doesn't care whether you understand it." At the time, it sounded philosophical. Months later, it would become the most practical advice I'd ever received. Life settled into familiar routines. Morning equipment checks. Radio updates every hour. Snowmobile inspections. Trail reports. Weather logs. Wildlife observations. Predictability keeps people alive in winter wilderness. So when routines break, you notice. The first strange report came from Grace. She frowned over a map spread across the break room table. "Wolves shifted territories." Walter barely looked up from his coffee. "They do. Not like this." She pointed toward a valley west of our station. "They abandoned 5 square miles overnight. No prey? Plenty. Disease? No signs." She hesitated. "They're avoiding something." Cole chuckled. "Maybe they finally got tired of your singing." Grace ignored him. "Wolves don't leave healthy territory in the middle of winter without pressure." Walter folded the map. "They'll come back." She didn't argue. But I noticed she kept glancing toward that valley whenever we reviewed patrol assignments. 3 days later, elk followed. More than 60 animals crossed frozen rivers heading east. Healthy. Uninjured. Silent. Animals migrate. But not like refugees. Even ravens stopped nesting in that section. Nature rarely panics. When it does, humans should pay attention. The weather station nearest the abandoned valley began transmitting incomplete data. Temperature readings vanished for exactly 19 minutes every afternoon. Wind speed dropped to 0 despite blizzards raging elsewhere. Humidity climbed impossibly high before instantly returning to normal. Luis blamed failing sensors. We replaced them. The replacement reported identical failures. We replaced it again. Same problem. Eventually Walter ordered us to ignore the readings. Probably magnetic interference. Nobody believed that explanation. Nobody offered another. Late one afternoon I volunteered to inspect Boundary Trail 9, a route skirting the western ridge overlooking the abandoned valley. It should have taken 3 hours. The sky hung low beneath heavy clouds that turned the entire forest blue-gray. Snow squeaked beneath my boots with every step. Cold enough that exposed skin burned within minutes. The radio crackled occasionally with ordinary check-ins. Everything felt perfectly normal. Until I realized I hadn't heard birds for nearly 40 minutes. Silence in winter isn't unusual. Absolute silence is. No chickadees. No woodpeckers. No distant crows. Not even wind. The trees stood perfectly still. I stopped walking. My own breathing sounded intrusive. Then I noticed something else. The snow around me remained pristine. No rabbit tracks. No squirrel prints. Nothing. As though every living creature had agreed to avoid this exact stretch of forest. I marked the location on my GPS. The device froze. Screen blank. Battery full. I restarted it. Nothing. Then, without warning, it rebooted and displayed coordinates placing me nearly 14 miles south of my actual position. I laughed under my breath. Technology hated cold. That happened. Still, something about the timing unsettled me. The silence ended all at once. Wind slammed through the trees. Branches groaned. A raven screamed somewhere overhead. My GPS corrected itself. Everything looked ordinary again. I finished my inspection and returned before sunset. Nobody seemed interested in my story except Walter. He listened quietly while cleaning an old lantern. When I finished, he asked only one question. "Did the snow look disturbed?" "No." "Not even by mice?" "No." He nodded once. All right. That's it. That's enough. He never explained what he meant. A week later, we received a missing persons report. 2 experienced backcountry photographers had failed to return from a 4-day trip. Search operations began before dawn. Conditions were difficult but manageable. Fresh snowfall covered much of the area they'd intended to explore. Finding tracks should have been straightforward. Instead, we found dozens. Not theirs. Animal prints crisscrossed frozen meadows. Fox. Lynx. Moose. Coyotes. Everything except humans. It looked as though the wilderness had erased only one kind of traveler. Late that afternoon, I located an abandoned campsite. Tent collapsed beneath snow. Cooking equipment still arranged neatly beside a frozen fire ring. Sleeping bags untouched. Camera batteries charging from a portable solar bank that should have died days earlier. 2 mugs sat beside the fire. One still contained frozen coffee. No signs of struggle. No blood. No equipment missing. No footprints. The campsite resembled a photograph someone had abandoned halfway through taking. Walter examined the scene for nearly 20 minutes. Then he quietly instructed everyone to pack up. We're leaving. I frowned. What about expanding the search? We're done here today. We've barely started. His voice hardened. I said we're leaving. Nobody argued. Back at the station, I cornered Nora while she organized reports. Why did Walter shut it down? She hesitated. Then lowered her voice. Did he ask whether you saw disturbed snow? I stared. How did you know? He always asks that. Why? I don't know. She looked toward Walter's office before continuing. I've heard him ask the same question after every winter disappearance. Every winter. The words lingered long after she walked away. I started reviewing archived incident reports during quiet evenings. Officially, winter disappearances averaged 1 every few years. Unofficially, patterns emerged. Reports withdrawn. Searches ended early. Coordinates omitted. Entire pages missing. Always between January and February. Always near the same western valley. Always after unusually cold weather. Most disturbing of all. Several reports mentioned trails not found on official maps. The descriptions varied. An old logging road. A narrow footpath. Freshly cleared snow. Stone steps. None matched existing terrain. Every witness described something slightly different. But every report ended the same way. Search suspended. No further action. I asked Luis whether old trail maps had ever changed. He looked uncomfortable. They change all the time. I mean entire trails appearing. Silence. Then he shrugged. You're spending too much time reading old paperwork. That wasn't an answer. The first heavy blizzard arrived 3 nights later. Snow hammered the station windows. Visibility dropped below 20 feet. Travel became impossible. We spent the evening playing cards while generators hummed beneath the floor. Power flickered once around midnight. Only for a second. Just enough for every light to blink. During that instant of darkness, I thought I saw someone standing beyond the dining hall window. Not moving. Watching. When the lights returned. Nothing. Probably a tree. Probably. Sleep came slowly. Around 3 in the morning I woke to an unfamiliar sound. Crunch. 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 Footsteps. Outside. Moving slowly around the station. One deliberate step at a time. Not hurried. Not searching. Circling. I checked the clock. Radio silent. Generator steady. The footsteps continued. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Pause. I pulled back the curtain. Moonlight reflected across untouched snow. There wasn't a single footprint anywhere outside the building. But the sound kept circling. As if someone, or something, was walking just beyond the edge of sight. I stood there until dawn, listening. When daylight finally spread across the valley, the sound stopped. The snow remained flawless. No tracks. No explanation. Only a growing certainty that winter had begun hiding something from us. And somewhere beyond the western ridge, beneath ancient trees that no longer welcomed wildlife, something had opened that every ranger before me had learned never to follow. I just didn't know yet that, before the month was over, I would see that impossible trail with my own eyes, and make the one decision every veteran ranger had spent decades trying to prevent. The morning after the footsteps, nobody mentioned the storm. Not because it hadn't been severe. Because something else had quietly taken its place. Walter stood over the operations map before sunrise with a pencil in his hand. Every morning he marked which patrol routes would be checked and which weather stations needed servicing. I'd watched him follow the same routine for nearly 3 years. That morning he erased one route. Then another. Finally, he drew a thick line across nearly a quarter of the western valley. Crew stays east of this line until further notice. Cole frowned. Storm damage? No. Any reason? Walter looked at him for a long moment. Because I said so? That ended the discussion. Walter wasn't the type to raise his voice. He didn't need to. When he spoke like that, everyone understood he wasn't inviting questions. Everyone except me. As the others filed out to gather equipment, I lingered. You're changing protocols. I am. Without telling us why. He folded the map carefully. Sometimes experience is the explanation. I almost argued. Instead, I nodded and left. But curiosity has a way of settling into your mind like a splinter. Every hour you ignore it, it digs a little deeper. The next several days felt wrong in ways I struggled to describe. The forest hadn't become dangerous. It had become hesitant. The wind changed directions without warning. Snow fell upward in tiny spirals before settling again. Icicles formed pointing sideways beneath certain branches. Nothing impossible. Just enough to make certainty feel unreliable. Grace noticed it too. While tracking elk migration east of the restricted zone, she stopped beside a stand of old fir trees and crouched. What do you see? I asked. She brushed snow away from the ground. There should be tracks. There aren't. Exactly. I looked around. Dozens of mature trees surrounded us. Bird nests. Broken branches. Chewed pine cones. Signs of life everywhere. Yet the snow beneath them remained untouched. No squirrels. No rabbits. No mice. She stood. I've worked around wildlife for 15 years. She looked toward the western ridge. I've never seen an area every species agrees to avoid. That afternoon, Luis called everyone into communications. You need to hear this. He pressed play on a digital recorder connected to one of the emergency radio repeaters. Static filled the room. Then, my own voice. Daniel checking Trail 9. I frowned. That's from Tuesday. Luis nodded. The recording continued. Visibility normal. Then silence. Exactly 12 seconds. Then my voice returned. Only. I wasn't speaking the same sentence. Don't follow me. Everyone looked at me. I shook my head immediately. I never said that. The recorder continued. Turn around while you still remember. Static. It's learning. Then nothing. Luis stopped the recording. The transmission came directly from your ranger radio. It has to be interference. Maybe. He didn't sound convinced. When did this happen? Tuesday. I was talking to dispatch Tuesday. That's the strange part. He rewound the file. The timestamp matches your regular check-in. Walter entered halfway through the conversation. Luis played the recording again. Walter listened without changing expression. When it ended, he quietly removed the memory card from the recorder. Delete every backup. Luis blinked. What? You heard me. But. No copies. Luis reluctantly obeyed. I watched Walter slip the card into his pocket. He noticed me staring. You didn't say those words. I know. But someone did. He walked away before I could ask what he meant. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I feared someone had imitated my voice. Because the voice sounded exactly like mine. Every pause. Every breath. Even the slight rasp that appeared when I spent too long outside in cold air. If someone had forged it. They knew me impossibly well. Around 2 in the morning I wandered into the equipment garage to clear my head. The building smelled of fuel, damp canvas, and cold metal. Rows of snowmobiles sat beneath hanging work lights. Everything was quiet. Then I noticed something taped beneath the windshield of my assigned vehicle. A folded piece of paper. There was no name. Just one sentence. Count the trees when the trail appears. If there are 12, leave immediately. No signature. No explanation. I searched the garage. Nothing. The security cameras covered both entrances. Luis reviewed the footage the next morning. Nobody had entered overnight. The note hadn't been there at midnight. It was there at 6. No one appeared between those times. Luis rewound the footage 4 times. Nothing. The paper simply existed. Walter took the note without saying a word. I expected him to demand an investigation. Instead, he carried it to the wood stove and burned it. Forget it. I'm not forgetting that. You need to. Who wrote it? I don't know. You don't even seem surprised. He stared into the fire. I stopped being surprised a long time ago. 3 days later, another storm rolled through. Not violent. Just heavy enough to blanket the forest in fresh snow. Perfect tracking conditions. Walter assigned me and Grace to inspect Weather Station Echo 7 near the edge of the restricted valley. Stay on the marked trail. We always do. I mean it. Grace glanced at me. Walter rarely repeated himself. The hike began uneventfully. Fresh powder softened every sound. The sky remained hidden behind thick clouds. Around noon we reached Echo 7. The weather station had frozen solid. Its solar panels were coated in ice despite facing south. Grace worked on clearing sensors while I checked nearby marker posts. Everything appeared normal. Then, I noticed a blaze mark on a tree. A simple red rectangle painted chest high. Trail markers. Perfectly ordinary. Except, there wasn't supposed to be a trail there. I unfolded my map. Nothing. No route. No maintenance path. No historical logging road. Just dense forest. Grace. She walked over. You ever noticed this marker? She frowned. I don't remember one. It's fresh. She touched the paint. Dry. Not weathered. Someone had marked a trail recently. We followed the blazes only 50 yards before stopping. More appeared ahead. Each exactly spaced. Professional. Official. It looked like a maintained ranger trail. Yet neither of us recognized it. Grace reached for her GPS. No signal. Mine showed the same. Compass? The needle spun lazily. We looked at one another. Without speaking, we turned around. Or at least, we thought we did. After less than a minute of walking, I stopped. The red trail marker stood directly ahead of us again. Same tree. Same scar in the bark. Grace stared. No. We walked away. I know we did. We turned 90 degrees. Walked another 100 yards. Snow untouched. No markers. Relief washed over me. Then, another red blaze appeared. On another tree. Behind it, a narrow opening between ancient hemlocks. Not wide enough for vehicles. Just enough for a person. The snow inside the opening was gone. Not melted. Gone. Dark earth stretched into the forest like a ribbon cutting through winter. Grace whispered, almost involuntarily, Daniel! I couldn't answer. Every instinct screamed that something about the path was fundamentally wrong. Snow covered every inch of the surrounding landscape. Branches sagged under white weight. Our own footprints stretched behind us. Yet this narrow trail remained perfectly bare. Dry leaves. dark soil, exposed roots. As though winter had politely stepped aside. The air changed. Not colder. Older. The smell of pine vanished. In its place came damp earth and something faintly metallic. Like old coins left in rainwater. I glanced upward. The trees lining the trail leaned inward ever so slightly. Not enough to touch. Enough to resemble an audience. Watching. Waiting. Grace grabbed my sleeve. Count them. What? The trees. I looked. 6 on the left. 6 on the right. 12. Exactly 12. The note. If there are 12, leave immediately. A pressure built behind my eyes. Not pain. More like standing too quickly after sitting for hours. The edges of my vision shimmered. For a heartbeat. I thought I saw movement farther down the trail. Someone walking away. Wearing a ranger jacket. Same dark green. Same backpack. Same stride. My stride. The figure never looked back. It simply disappeared around a bend that shouldn't have existed. Because from where we stood, the trail looked perfectly straight. Did you? Grace asked. I don't know. You saw someone. I think so. She swallowed hard. I saw you. The words froze me. What? I saw you walking down the trail. I've been standing beside you. I know. Her voice shook. But that's what I saw. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The forest remained impossibly still. No wind. No birds. Not even the faint creak of snow settling. Then, somewhere far ahead, a whistle. 3 short notes. Every ranger in North America recognizes that signal. 3 blasts. The distress call. Someone needing immediate help. It echoed through the trees. Then again. Closer. 3 whistles. Grace instinctively reached for her own emergency whistle. Walter's voice echoed in my memory. Stay on the marked trail. No. Not just that. Years earlier during training he'd said something almost casually. If you hear a distress whistle you can't identify, answer over the radio first. I grabbed Grace's arm before she blew hers. Wait. She lowered it. The whistles came again. Closer still. Then a voice. Maya! It was a woman shouting. Panicked. Desperate. Please! Another voice answered. A man. We're over here! Grace's eyes widened. The missing photographers. They'd vanished over a week earlier. Impossible. Yet the voices sounded clear. Alive. Close enough to touch. I raised my radio. This is Ranger Mercer. Identify yourselves. Static. Nothing else. Then the woman screamed. Not in pain. In recognition. Daniel! Every hair on my arm stood upright. Grace looked at me. How does she know your name? I've never met them. The radio crackled. My own voice answered. Don't answer them. Silence. Then, almost gently. They don't know they're gone. The transmission ended. Grace backed away from the trail. We're leaving. I nodded instantly. Neither of us argued. Neither of us looked back. We walked quickly. Then faster. Finally almost running. After nearly 15 minutes, the ordinary snow-covered maintenance trail emerged ahead. Our footprints remained exactly where we'd left them. Echo 7 stood quietly in the distance. As though nothing unusual had happened. We reached the station just before dusk. Walter was waiting outside. He looked at our faces. Then at our boots. Only then did he ask. Did either of you step onto the bare ground? Grace answered first. No. I shook my head. We stayed in the snow. Walter closed his eyes for a brief moment. Not relief. Gratitude. You did the right thing. That trail. I know. It wasn't on any map. I know. The voices knew my name. I know. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. As if carrying memories far heavier than winter itself. Finally, he spoke the sentence every ranger at Iron Hollow seemed to understand except me. It opened earlier this year. No one asked what it was. No one asked why it opened. Because from the expressions around the room, I realized something that chilled me more than the impossible trail ever could. Everyone else already knew it existed. And they had been hoping I would never have to see it. Walter wouldn't answer any more questions that night. The conversation ended the moment he said the trail had opened early. He walked into his office, shut the door, and locked it. Not slammed. Not hurried. Locked. It was the first time I'd ever seen him do that. Iron Hollow had never been a place where people locked doors. The station sat miles from the nearest paved road. If someone managed to find us in the middle of winter, the assumption was that they needed help, not that they meant harm. The click of that lock echoed through the hallway longer than it should have. Grace stood beside me, arms folded tightly against her chest. He shouldn't have said anything. What do you mean? The less you know. She stopped herself. The less I know what? She looked toward Walter's office. Forget it. No. She sighed. I've been here 11 winters. I stared. She never mentioned that before. You've seen it before? I've seen enough. Enough to explain what's happening? Her expression answered before her words did. No. Dinner that evening was unusually quiet. Normally Cole filled the room with terrible jokes while Evan complained about snowmobile engines. Luis usually had a weather forecast running on the radio in the background. That night no one reached for the radio. No one joked. Even the coffee seemed untouched. Halfway through the meal, Nora quietly set an old binder on the table. It was thick, its corners softened by decades of use. She pushed it toward me. You didn't get this from me. Before I could reply, she stood and left. The cover had no title. Only faded black tape with one handwritten word. Winters. I waited until everyone had gone to bed before opening it. Inside were reports. Not official incident reports. Personal journals. Some handwritten. Others typed on aging paper. Each one belonged to a ranger who had worked at Iron Hollow. The earliest entry dated back nearly 70 years. I skimmed the first page. If this notebook reaches another winter crew, do not assume every trail that appears belongs to this forest. I frowned. The next journal belonged to a ranger named Eleanor Briggs. January 18th. Saw a fresh trail west of Cedar Hollow. Walter's predecessor ordered immediate withdrawal. Said the mountain had remembered something. Another. February 2nd. Heard my brother calling from the trees. He's been dead 8 years. Another. Never follow voices after snowfall. Another. If you smell spring flowers in January, turn back. Another. The trail changes shape depending on who finds it. The entries grew stranger the farther I read. Yet they all shared one thing in common. None described monsters. None described attacks. Instead, they described impossible choices. One ranger wrote about finding a cabin that contained photographs from his childhood. Another claimed he'd walked for 15 minutes only to return 3 days older. A third insisted he'd met a woman who knew every decision he'd almost made in life. Every account ended abruptly. Sometimes with a resignation letter. Sometimes with a transfer request. Sometimes with no final entry at all. One page had been torn out so violently that part of the paper remained caught in the binding. Across the remaining fragments someone had written in heavy pencil. It doesn't hunt people. Below it. It waits for regret. I closed the binder. Outside, snow tapped softly against the windows. For the first time since joining Iron Hollow, I wondered whether the wilderness around us was dangerous because of what lived there, or because of what it reflected. Sleep never came. Around 4 in the morning I gave up and walked outside. The cold hit like a wall. Above me, the sky had cleared completely. Thousands of stars stretched across the mountains. The snow reflected enough moonlight that I barely needed my flashlight. Everything looked peaceful. Then I noticed footprints. Human footprints. Fresh. leading away from the station. I crouched beside them. Standard Ranger boots. R-issued model. Size 11. Exactly my size. I instinctively looked down. My boots. The tread matched. A chill spread through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. The tracks hadn't been there when I'd stepped outside. They began 15 feet ahead of me. As though someone wearing my boots had appeared in the snow. Already walking. They headed toward the western ridge. I followed for perhaps 30 yards before common sense finally caught up. The tracks rounded a cluster of pines. I hurried after them. Nothing. They simply stopped. Not faded. Not covered by drifting snow. Stopped. The final print sat perfectly formed in the moonlight. Beyond it stretched untouched snow. No return prints. No leap. No animal tracks. Nothing. Just one final step. I stared at it for a long time before turning back. When I reached the station, Walter was standing on the porch. "I thought you'd go farther." "You knew." "I guessed." I looked at him. "There were footprints." "I know." "They were mine." "I know." "Why aren't you surprised?" Walter leaned against the railing. "Because they aren't always yours." The following afternoon, another emergency call came in. A lone winter backpacker had activated a satellite beacon near Black Creek. The signal lasted less than 30 seconds before disappearing. Weather conditions were favorable enough for a search. Walter assigned 3 teams. Mine included Grace and Lise. As we loaded equipment into the snowmobiles, Walter stopped me. "If you hear anyone calling your name." "I know." "Do you?" I hesitated. He looked directly into my eyes. "Even if it's me." The sentence hung unfinished. "Don't answer until you can see me." Black Creek lay east of the restricted valley. Far enough away that I assumed we'd avoid anything unusual. For nearly 2 hours, we searched frozen streambeds and abandoned campsites. Nothing. Then Luis raised a hand. "Tracks." We gathered around. One hiker. Moving north. No signs of panic. The stride looked steady. Normal. The tracks continued for nearly half a mile before reaching an open clearing. Then they changed. Not direction. Spacing. Each footprint landed farther apart. 5 feet. 7 feet. 9. As though the hiker had begun taking impossibly long strides. Eventually the distance between prints exceeded 15 feet. Grace measured one with her ski pole. "No one can do that." Luis forced a laugh. "Maybe they started running." I shook my head. "They'd fall." The tracks continued another 100 yards. Then, only one footprint remained. Deep. Perfectly shaped. Beyond it, nothing. Exactly like the prints outside the station. Luis slowly lowered his camera. "I don't like this." Neither did I. We spread out to search the surrounding area. Visibility remained excellent. The clearing was almost perfectly circular. Pines formed a wall around us. The air felt strangely warm. Not enough to melt snow. Enough that I loosened my jacket. Then came the smell. Fresh rain. Impossible in January. It reminded me of childhood summers. Wet soil. Green grass. My father's old flannel jacket drying on the porch after a storm. The memory hit with startling clarity. I hadn't thought about that afternoon in years. I closed my eyes. For one impossible moment, I could hear him laughing. Not imagined. Heard. Somewhere nearby. "Daniel!" I opened my eyes immediately. Silence. "Daniel!" The voice came again. Behind me. Soft. Warm. Exactly as I remembered. I turned slowly. No one. Only snow-covered trees. Then, "Kiddo." My chest tightened. No one had called me that since I was 10. It had been my father's nickname for me. Grace appeared between the trees. "Daniel?" I looked at her. "You heard that?" "Heard what?" "My father." Her face lost color. She stepped closer. I heard my daughter. I froze. Grace had once mentioned she had a daughter who died as an infant decades earlier. She had never spoken about it again. Luis stumbled toward us from another direction. His face looked pale. My mother, he whispered. None of us spoke. Because we all understood at the same time. The voices weren't random. They weren't trying to frighten us. They were choosing the one person each of us wanted, however irrationally, to hear again. A branch snapped somewhere ahead. We looked up. A figure stood among the trees. Too far away to distinguish clearly. Green Ranger jacket. Dark knit cap. Motionless. Luis raised a hand. Walter? The figure didn't answer. It simply lifted one arm. And pointed. Toward the west. Toward the valley we had been ordered never to enter. When we looked back a second later, the figure was gone. Only the untouched snow remained. None of us suggested following. None of us needed to. Some instincts exist for a reason. As we returned to the snowmobiles in silence, I couldn't shake a single thought. Whatever waited beyond the missing trail didn't tempt people with terror. It tempted them with hope. And I was beginning to understand why so many experienced rangers had disappeared without a struggle. Some doors aren't opened by fear. Some are open because, for one impossible moment, they promise to give back what you've spent a lifetime learning to live without. The drive back to Iron Hollow should have taken less than an hour. Instead, it took nearly 3. None of us spoke about the voices. We didn't need to. Silence carried the weight of shared experience far better than words ever could. The forest had crossed the line that afternoon. Until then, every strange event could be filed away under equipment failures, weather anomalies, or the tricks isolation played on a tired mind. But no explanation accounted for 3 different people hearing 3 different voices at the same time. And none of us had told the others whose voices we were most afraid of hearing. Walter was waiting outside the station when we returned. He looked at our faces before asking a single question. Did any of you follow them? Grace answered first. No. Luis simply shook his head. Walter turned to me. And you? I wanted to. His expression softened, just for a moment. That's the correct answer. The correct answer? If you'd said you never wanted to. He looked toward the dark tree line. I know it hadn't reached you. Those words stayed with me all evening. It hadn't reached me. Not completely. But enough that part of me still wondered what would have happened if I'd taken just one step toward my father's voice. That night Walter finally unlocked his office. Come in. The room smelled of old paper and cedar. Maps covered one wall, some so faded they were nearly illegible. On another hung photographs of ranger crews stretching back decades. One photograph caught my attention. A winter crew from the late 1980s. 7 rangers. Walter looked almost 30 years younger. The others smiled into the camera. One face had been scratched away so violently that only torn paper remained. I pointed toward it. Who was that? Walter stared at the photograph for a long time. Thomas Keene. What happened to him? He followed the trail. I waited. Walter didn't continue. Did he disappear? No. The answer surprised me. He came back. Relief flickered across my face. Walter noticed. You shouldn't sound relieved. He opened a locked drawer and removed a leather notebook. The cover was cracked with age. Inside were handwritten entries spanning almost 40 winters. His handwriting remained remarkably consistent until about 15 years earlier. Then it changed. Letters grew shakier. Sentences became shorter. The final pages contained only dates. What is this? My memory. I looked up. What do you mean? Walter tapped one page. Read. January 12th. Forgot where I left the truck keys. Found them in the freezer. The next page. Called Grace by Eleanor's name again. Another. Couldn't remember whether my wife preferred tea or coffee. Then. Dreamed about the trail. Woke remembering things that never happened. Another. Forgot my son's birthday. Another. Remembered a daughter I never had. I frowned. Walter watched me carefully. The doctors blamed age. But I've taken cognitive tests every year. And I passed them. Then why write everything down? Because the things I forget. He paused. Aren't random. He turned to one final page. Every line contained the same sentence. It takes the memories that would lead you back. I don't understand. Walter closed the notebook. Neither do I. He stood and walked to the window. People think memory is a record. He shook his head. It isn't. It's who we are. He looked out into the darkness. If you remove enough memories. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The next morning the temperature dropped lower than any reading Louise had ever recorded. Even inside the station windows developed frost on the interior. The generators struggled. Metal tools became brittle enough to crack if dropped. Outside, the forest looked frozen in place. No wind. No falling snow. No sound. Then every radio in the station activated simultaneously. Static. Then a woman's voice. Calm. Gentle. Good morning. Everyone froze. Louise checked the frequency. Nothing. No signal source. The voice continued. One of you has been here before. Static swallowed the words. Then silence. Every radio shut off at once. No one moved. Finally Cole muttered. I quit. Nobody laughed. That afternoon Walter made an announcement. We're evacuating Iron Hollow. Every head turned. What? The station closes immediately. Grace blinked. In January? I've already contacted headquarters. Louise frowned. They'll never approve. They already have. I stared. You've done this before. Walter looked at me. Twice. Why? He didn't answer. Instead, he handed each of us evacuation assignments. We would leave at first light. No exceptions. For the first time since joining Iron Hollow, I believed we might actually escape whatever was happening. I was wrong. The storm arrived just after midnight. It wasn't forecast. It wasn't even possible. Snow fell so heavily the emergency floodlights disappeared behind a solid wall of white. The wind screamed against the building hard enough to shake the walls. Power failed. The backup generator started. Then failed again. Darkness swallowed the station. Someone shouted from the hallway. I've lost communications. Another voice. The garage door's frozen shut. Flashlights flickered through the corridors. Outside, something struck the roof. Not loudly. Just one deliberate impact. Then another. Then another. As if someone wearing heavy boots were walking across the station. Cole grabbed a flashlight. I'm checking it. Walter blocked the door. No. It could be a fallen branch. No. What if someone? There is nobody on that roof. The footsteps continued. Slow. Measured. Circling. Exactly like the ones I'd heard outside my room days earlier. Only now. Everyone heard them. Nobody volunteered to investigate again. Just before dawn the storm stopped. Not gradually. Instantly. The silence that followed felt almost painful. Walter opened the front door. The evacuation convoy waited outside. Or rather, it should have. Every snowmobile remained exactly where we parked it. Completely buried. Except one. Mine. The snow around it had been cleared away. Its engine was warm. I touched the hood. Recently used. Walter's face drained of color. Who moved it? No one answered. Because no one had. Then Grace noticed something hanging from the handlebars. A compass. Mine. The same one I'd reported missing nearly 2 weeks earlier. The needle pointed west. It didn't move. No matter how the compass was turned. Always west. Always toward the valley. Walter quietly placed it on the ground. Then crushed it beneath his boot. We leave on foot. The hike out began under a pale gray sky. Fresh snow reached our knees. Progress was painfully slow. Walter insisted we stay within arm's reach of one another. No one walks alone. For nearly 2 hours everything remained normal. Then Louise stopped. Where's Cole? We all turned. 6 people. Not 7. Cole had vanished. There was no shout. No struggle. No broken branches. Nothing. Only 6 parallel lines of footprints stretching behind us through the snow. We counted them twice. 6 sets. Walter looked back toward the station. Then down at the trail behind us. His shoulders slumped. We never had 7. Silence. What? Walter frowned as if trying to solve a puzzle. Evan. He looked around. Where's Evan? Grace stared at him. There isn't an Evan. Walter's breathing became uneven. He has a brother. No. He always. Walter stopped speaking. I felt my stomach tighten. The photographs. The journals. His notebook. Memory. Louise whispered. I remember 2 brothers. Grace looked at him. So do I. Nora shook her head. There was only Cole. We stood in the middle of that silent forest, each of us holding a different version of the same past. No one could agree on something as simple as who had worked beside us for years. And that terrified me far more than disappearing footprints ever had. Because if memory could be rewritten so completely, how would we know what else we'd already forgotten? Walter closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were filled with quiet resignation. It's awake. No one asked what it was. For the first time. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Ahead of us, beyond the snow-covered ridge, something dark cut through the white landscape. A narrow strip of bare earth. The missing trail. It hadn't waited for us to find it. This time. It had found us. The trail stretched across the snow like a wound that refused to freeze. No drift covered it. No frost touched it. Dark earth curved gently between ancient hemlocks, disappearing into a veil of gray mist that seemed to absorb the morning light instead of reflecting it. None of us moved. For several long seconds, the only sound was our breathing. Walter removed his gloves with slow, deliberate care and knelt at the edge of the exposed soil. He didn't touch it. He simply stared. I hoped, he said quietly, that I'd retire before it remembered this place again. No one asked what he meant. Some questions lose their importance the moment you're standing in front of something that shouldn't exist. Louise broke the silence first. We go around it. Walter nodded. We never cross. It seemed simple enough. The trail couldn't have been more than 4 feet wide. We angled east, intending to skirt around it and continue toward the highway beyond the mountains. I kept my eyes on the ground, carefully placing each step in untouched snow. 20 yards? 30. 40. I looked up. The trail was directly in front of us. Exactly where it had been before. Grace stopped so suddenly I nearly walked into her. No. Walter pointed left. We tried again. This time we walked nearly 100 yards without speaking. The terrain changed. The slope steepened. A frozen stream crossed our path. Everything looked different. Until Louise quietly whispered, It's here. The bare earth waited for us again. The same 12 hemlocks. The same black ribbon through the snow. It hadn't moved. We had. Or at least, we believed we had. Walter closed his eyes. Everyone hold the rope. Only then did I notice the climbing line coiled around his shoulder. He tied each of us together, leaving several feet between every person. If one of us stops. He looked at each of us in turn. The others keep walking. Nora frowned. Even if someone falls? Especially if someone falls. His voice was calm. If you stop to help, everyone stops. None of us liked the instruction. None of us argued. We started again. This time no one looked toward the trail. Walter led us through dense pines, across buried boulders, and around frozen ponds. I counted my steps to keep my mind occupied. 50. 100. 200. 300. The rope tugged gently behind me as everyone maintained the same pace. Then, the tension disappeared. I glanced back. The rope lay slack across the snow. Luis. Grace. Nora. Walter. Gone. Only empty white forest remained behind me. The rope ended cleanly in the snow as though someone had sliced reality itself. I spun around. Grace! My voice echoed once. Then silence. No answer. Not even the usual forest echoes. Only stillness. I looked ahead. The missing trail waited less than 20 feet away. Panic is a peculiar thing. People imagine screaming, running, wild decisions. Real panic is quieter. It shrinks the world until only the next breath exists. I forced myself to inhale slowly. Think. The rope had vanished. Not broken. Vanished. If I charged into the trees searching for the others, I'd almost certainly become more lost. Walter's instructions came back to me. Keep walking. Even if someone disappears. I hated him for saying it. I hated myself for obeying. But I kept moving. The forest beyond the ridge looked older. Not in appearance. In feeling. The trees stood farther apart. The air carried the scent of damp earth despite the surrounding snow. For the first time in weeks I heard birds. A robin. In January. Impossible. The farther I walked, the warmer the air became. Snow patches gave way to green moss. Then grass. Then wildflowers. My breath caught. I knew these flowers. Purple lupins. My mother had planted them beside our porch when I was a child. They couldn't possibly grow here. Yet there they were. Fresh. Blooming. The trail curved gently around a hill. Beyond it stood a small wooden cabin. Weathered. Simple. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney. Every instinct told me to turn away. Instead, I walked closer. The front porch creaked beneath my weight. The rocking chair beside the door swayed gently. Not from wind. There wasn't any. Someone had been sitting there. Recently. I raised a trembling hand and knocked. 3 soft taps. The door opened. My father stood there. Exactly as I remembered him. 42 years old. Gray flannel shirt. Stubble along his jaw. The small scar beneath his left eye from splitting firewood when I was 8. He smiled. There you are, kiddo. Every defense I'd built over the last 25 years collapsed in an instant. I couldn't speak. He laughed softly. I was wondering how long you'd take. Tears blurred my vision. I watched you grow up. He nodded toward the forest. You've done well. This wasn't possible. I knew it wasn't. Yet every detail was perfect. Even his voice carried the slight rasp I'd almost forgotten. He stepped aside. Come in. I looked past him. The cabin's interior was warm. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace. Family photographs covered the mantel. My mother smiled from one frame. A Christmas morning I'd nearly forgotten. My high school graduation. Birthdays. Camping trips. Moments that had never happened. Because he had disappeared before any of them. Yet here they were. Entire decades of memories. That should not exist. For one unbearable moment. I wanted them. Not the cabin. Not the impossible forest. The life. A version of reality where grief had never entered our home. My father noticed my hesitation. He smiled sadly. It's all right. You know? I know why you're afraid. His eyes softened. You think this isn't real. It isn't. What makes your world more real than this one? I had no answer. Because somewhere deep inside me, I wasn't sure anymore. Then I noticed something. The photographs. In every single picture. My father smiled. But I never did. In birthday photos. Graduation. Fishing trips. Christmas mornings. My face remained expressionless. Not sad. Empty. As if someone had carefully painted me into a happy life without ever understanding what happiness looked like. I looked closer. In one frame, I had 6 fingers on my left hand. Another showed shadows falling in opposite directions. Another captured snow outside the window, while bright summer leaves covered the trees. Tiny mistakes. Almost invisible. The illusion wasn't perfect. It was assembled from memories, not reality. My father saw me looking. For the first time. His smile faltered. You don't have to keep searching. The warmth in the room began to feel heavy. The fire crackled too rhythmically. The clock on the wall ticked backward. Outside the windows, the forest no longer matched itself. The same crow landed on 3 different branches at once. My father's voice deepened almost imperceptibly. Stay. Not a request. A need. Something in this place needed me to choose it. To surrender willingly. Not through fear. Through longing. I stepped backward. I'm sorry. His expression shifted. Not into anger. Into disappointment so profound it nearly broke me. You'll be alone again. I already am. You don't have to be. I know. I wiped my eyes. But if you're really my father. My voice trembled. You never asked me to stop living just to stay with you. Silence. The cabin shivered. Hairline cracks spread across the walls. The family photographs blurred. My father's face flickered. For one instant he looked impossibly old. Then impossibly young. Then like a stranger. The smile vanished. So, the voice said quietly. You remembered. The cabin dissolved. The warmth disappeared. I stumbled backward into knee-deep snow. The flowers were gone. The smoke. The porch. Everything. Only the winter forest remained. Walter stood 20 yards away. Older than I had ever seen him. Grace and Louise knelt nearby, each struggling to catch their breath. None of us spoke for several minutes. Finally Walter asked, What did it offer you? I looked toward the empty space where the cabin had stood. My father. Walter nodded once. It always does. What did it offer you? He stared into the trees. My wife. Grace whispered. My daughter. Louise closed his eyes. My mother. None of us asked Nora. Some grief deserves privacy. By late afternoon we reached the ranger station. Or rather, where it had been. The buildings were still there. The radio tower. The garage. The observation deck. Everything looked unchanged. Except, the parking area was overgrown with young pines nearly 15 feet tall. Snowmobiles lay rusted beneath decades of decay. The station windows were shattered. The roof had partially collapsed. Walter approached slowly. A weathered sign still hung above the entrance. The paint had faded almost white. Below it, nailed crookedly to the wall, was another plaque. Iron Hollow Ranger Station. Closed permanently. Winter operations ended, February 14, 1998. None of us spoke. Walter's hands began to shake. He whispered, No. Louise stared at the rusted vehicles. We left this morning. According to our memories. Yes. According to everything in front of us. We had been gone for decades. Whether time had passed around us, or memory had passed through us, none of us could ever prove. We eventually found our way back to civilization. People recognized our names. Our records existed. But the dates never quite matched our memories. Some people we remembered had died years earlier. Others insisted conversations had taken place that none of us recalled. Walter retired soon afterward. He never returned to the mountains. Neither did Grace. Neither did Louise. As for me, I still hike. I still love forests. Because what happened out there didn't teach me to fear the wilderness. It taught me to respect the quiet places inside myself. The parts that still whisper about roads not taken. The people we couldn't save. The lives we imagined would have been kinder if only one moment had unfolded differently. Sometimes, on the coldest mornings of winter, I wake convinced I can smell damp earth beneath fresh snow. Sometimes I catch myself listening for 3 distant whistle blasts that never come. And every now and then, when I pass through old forests where no map seems entirely trustworthy, I count the trees without realizing I'm doing it. 1, 2, 3, until 12. Then I turn around. Not because I believe an impossible trail is waiting for me, but because I finally understand the lesson the mountains tried to teach us. The greatest horrors are rarely the things that lurk in darkness. They are the versions of ourselves willing to abandon everything we still have, for one last chance to reclaim what we've already lost.